Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Today, Pakistan voted and the rest of the world wondered why. It was an election out of the Rawalpindi playbook. No mobile services, low turnout and infinite delays. Most opposition parties have complained of rigging. In some places, voters were turned back after ballot paper ran out. So it looks like the army got what it wanted, a grand selection dressed up as an election. The counting has already begun. By late tonight or tomorrow, we should have the results. No prizes for guessing. Another Nawaz Sharif comeback. We'll be bringing you all the details on how the voting unfolded, also how the army used technology to rig this election. In the Maldives, the government has been warned. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, says its debt levels are unsustainable. Could the Maldives be going the Sri Lanka way? We'll tell you. Meanwhile, India and 4 European nations are on the verge of striking a new deal. It could bring investments worth $100 billion to Indian shores. In the world of tech, Nvidia is making waves. The chip maker is on the verge of overtaking Amazon. We'll tell you how. In the US, Nikki Haley has dragged India into the presidential campaign. In Russia, the economy appears to be beating Western sanctions. And in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu has ruled out a ceasefire. Finally, are you fed up of work calls at home? That this story is for you. All this and more lined up on this show. First, the headlines. Russia bars Boris Nemtsov from the presidential election. The anti-Putin campaigner has been critical of the war in Ukraine. The elections will be held from 15 to 17 March. President Putin is almost certain to win re-election. He has been in power in Russia either as Prime Minister or President for more than 2 decades. New Delhi scraps the India-Myanmar free movement regime. It allowed citizens from either nation to cross the border and travel up to 16 kilometers without a passport or visa. Home Minister Amit Shah cites security concerns for the move. India has also decided to fence the entire border with Myanmar. And staying with India, farmer protest in Noida in Uttar Pradesh. Massive traffic jams on the Delhi-Noida border. Police stopped the farmers from marching to Parliament. They're demanding better compensation for the land they've sold. Zimbabwe abolishes the death penalty. Its last execution was almost 2 decades ago. The death penalty was introduced in the country by its British colonizers. The president himself is a former death row inmate. He was imprisoned during the struggle for independence. After Meta, now TikTok is suing the European Union. They're challenging an EU fee to enforce a content moderation law. Last year, TikTok said it had around 125 million monthly active users in the European Union. The EU is also facing legal challenges from online retailers like Amazon. And amid the flight tracking drama, pop star Taylor Swift sells one of her 2 private jets. Just days ago, she had sent a legal notice to a college student for tracking her planes. In 2022, Swift topped the list of celebrities with the highest carbon emissions. Today we saw a masterclass, a lesson on how not to hold an election. A dismal turnout, long delays and a mobile service shutdown. You name it, Pakistan's election had it. The day began with some expected news. Mobile services were shut down across the country. Why do I say expected? Because how else can you rig an election? Polls opened at 8 a.m. local time. Some 128 million Pakistanis were eligible to vote. Slowly, they started trickling in. Look at the scenes in Karachi. It's the biggest city in Pakistan, also the country's commercial capital. Turnout was slow to pick up there. In these pictures, you can see more soldiers than voters. And the scenes were similar in other cities as well, like Islamabad and Quetta. Many voters also complained of difficulties like never-ending delays and inefficient poll officers.
The processes are very slow, and I think this is the untrained, unprofessional people are just sitting there.
We are facing internet issues. It is hard to call our voters. A few people are coming to vote. We did not expect a suspension of mobile and internet services.
We have been standing in this line for almost 2 hours now. There are no lists like previous elections. They are sending voters here and there, sometimes to number 8, sometimes to number 3. It is a total chaos.
The biggest worry was security. We saw multiple attacks on election offices yesterday. 2 of them were quite serious. This happened in Balochistan. Both explosions targeted candidate offices. They killed around 28 people. Later, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for it. So the fear was today would be worse, that more attacks would follow today. Luckily, it was not that bad. We did not see violence on a national level in Pakistan today. Only a handful of attacks were reported. One of them was in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. A bomb blast targeted a police convoy in Dera Ismail Khan. 4 cops were killed. In Balochistan, grenade attacks were reported. They killed 2 security personnel. In the rest of the country, things were largely stable. You can write that down to security presence. Some 650,000 personnel had been deployed, 650,000 security officials. So the whole country was in lockdown. Even the borders with Iran and Afghanistan were shut. Same with mobile services. Last week, there was speculation about a shutdown, but Pakistan's telecom regulator denied it. They said no shutdown was being planned. Yet this morning, they switched it off. All mobile services across the country were stopped today. Basically, Pakistan went dark. Candidates could not speak to their supporters. Parties could not coordinate with voters. It was a logistical nightmare. The question is why? Why shut down mobile services on election day? Apparently to keep the security situation under check. But let's face it, the shutdown was a rigging tactic. No mobile service equals no scrutiny. It also exposed who stands where. Bilawal Bhutto of the Pakistan People's Party opposed it. He said, lift the mobile shutdown.
So the mobile phone services should be immediately restored for the sake of security, democracy and normal functionality. This is the basic right of the Pakistani people. They must cast their votes today, and this block can cause impediments to that.
Well, he's asked for this. So did workers of Imran Khan's PTI. They said their whole network had been crippled. But guess who did not complain? Nawaz Sharif. The man touted to be the next Prime Minister of Pakistan. He cast his vote at a polling station in Lahore. He was accompanied by his daughter, Maryam Nawaz. Sharif says the election was truly fair.
Now, today, I think that is absolutely fair.
His rivals too cast their vote. Bilawal Bhutto at a polling station in Larkana and Imran Khan via postal ballot. Chances are that postal vote did not leave jail premises. Now, all of these developments would discourage any voter. It would make them lose faith in democracy. But thousands of Pakistani voters still turned up today. They knew the polls were rigged. They knew their vote may not matter. Yet they turned up at the polling station.
We came here today by foot and then on a tractor trolley. It was a very difficult and hard journey. We have no school in our village. The young girls have to travel far away for studies.
I feel very excited to cast my first vote. And because, everyone waits for their first vote. I think it's like a good experience.
Voting does matter. Everyone should come out. Everyone. No one should stay at home. Today is not the day to stay at home. Those who choose to sit at home today will do injustice to themselves.
I came to vote for good government, a good economy, and for a good image of Pakistan abroad, and for the good future of our children.
What do you call that? Misplaced optimism? Naivete? Or something else? Whatever it is, Pakistan's army throttled it. They used a number of tactics to rig the voting today. Delays were one of them. Voters said poll officers were moving at a snail's pace, so the lines barely moved. In some places, voting started very late or never started at all, like at a polling station in Karachi, polling station number 81. Even at 2 p.m., voting was yet to start there. How about that? 6 hours into voting, polling stations were shut. Elsewhere, ballot paper ran out, so voters were turned back. They were told, you cannot cast your vote. PTI supporters were protesting throughout the day. They have complained of widespread rigging. Yet Pakistan expects the world to take this election seriously. We knew the process would be rigged. We knew the army would try everything. But today's election went one step ahead. It wasn't just subversion of democracy. It was an all-out murder. And all of this was in unexpected lines. Candidates have held rallies. Voters have cast their ballots. Behind the scenes, the Pakistani army is pulling the strings. You've probably heard this a million times. The result will be announced later tonight or tomorrow. But we already know the name of the winner, and that is Nawaz Sharif. But how did the military make sure that Sharif wins? How did they rig the vote? A few days ago, a letter began doing the rounds in Pakistan. It was written by a local election officer. This was a letter of complaint. And who was it addressed to? Pakistan's Election Commission. This officer had a concern. The Election Commission uses a software, an election management system. And it was behaving, the system was behaving in an odd way. The officer had specific complaints. Data on the software was being deleted. Some staffers were assigned duties on it. But soon after the records were updated, this data vanished. And when this problem came to light, the officer did what anyone would do: call for IT support. A technical team looked into the problem, and like most IT support teams, they could not solve it. They said it was probably a technical glitch. And the election officer was asked to continue using the software, but the officer was not convinced. The team using the software faced trouble too. So together, they reported their problems. They expressed their reservations. Again, no solution was offered. The tech team asked the election officers to keep using the same faulty software. Finally, this officer decided to write a complaint letter. And we have a copy of the letter. In fact, let me read out a section of the letter to you and listen to this very carefully. This is what it says. This weakness of the system has created many issues and also raises a question mark on the reliability and validity of the tool or software. This shows that either the election management system is an utter failure or, and listen to this, there is someone else that controls and manages the system behind the veil. So someone else is in control, he says. Or that's what he's suggesting. Who could be pulling the strings from behind? This system belongs to a government department, Pakistan's National Database Registration Authority, or NADRA. They're supposed to be an independent and autonomous agency. And what is their job? To maintain the database of all citizens, like population data, demographic files, and most importantly, voter rolls. They maintain all of this. Now, NADRA has an important role to play in this election. It controls all the systems used to administer the election and transmit the results. This agency is like a referee in a football match. Their task is to call out who has hit the goal in the election match. Now, usually this referee is a civilian. But last year, there was a sudden change in their leadership. Instead of a civilian official, a serving general of the Pakistan Army was given charge of NADRA. Which begs the question, why is a serving general in charge of Pakistan's voter rolls? And it's not really rocket science to figure out the answer. The army put their own man in the driver's seat to ensure a favorable outcome. Last month, there was another complaint. It came from a member of the PPP, the Pakistan People's Party, led by the Bhutto Zardaris. Now, they had raised objections to NADRA's systems. One of their lawmakers had written a letter. It said the party has, quote-unquote, serious objections to the systems. Pakistan's Election Commission responded. It played down the risk of manipulation, but at this point, It's really hard to take any assurance at face value. It's like the army is not even bothering to hide how it is rigging the election. So from military coups to silent coups to brazen selection of prime ministers, this is how Pakistan's sham democracy has progressed under the army. There's trouble for the Maldives. The International Monetary Fund has warned its government. And what is the warning? Be careful of your debt. It's a timely warning for President Mohammad Muizzu. He's been revamping Maldivian foreign policy. India out, China in. That is his mantra. That's Muizzu's new policy. India out, China in. And China, as we know, is the biggest loan shark in town. So how will this equation work out? We'll get to that in a bit. But first, let's look at the IMF warning. Here's what the International Monetary Fund has said, and I'm quoting. Without significant policy changes, the overall fiscal deficits and public debt are projected to stay elevated, and the Maldives remains at high risk of external and overall debt distress. Let me underline those words. High risk of debt distress. You know what that means? It means your loans and liabilities are way too much. You could soon be unable to make payments. In other words, a default is a possibility. The Maldives is at high risk of that situation. And how much debt are we talking about? In 2021, their external debt was around $3 billion. The Maldivian GDP is all of $5.4 billion. External debt is $3 billion. So the foreign debt is 55% of the national GDP. Total debt is even higher, almost 110% of the GDP. And where does China figure in this? Beijing is the biggest lender to the Maldives. They owe 42% of their foreign debt to China, which is around $1.2 billion. And that's a lot of money for the Maldives. Higher debt also means higher servicing costs. This year, Mali will have to spend $300 million on debt servicing. Basically, interest and repayment, $300 million. By 2026, that number could reach $1.07 billion. In other words, distress. This data raises two important questions. Number one, how did Mali rack up this debt? And number two, what is Muizzu's plan to pay it back? To be fair, these loans predate him. The Chinese debt was mostly taken during Abdullah Yamin's presidency. He was in power from 2013 to 2018. Yamin too was pro-China. So he took a lot of loans from Beijing. Then came the Wuhan virus pandemic. Mali's top source of income was shut down. That's tourism. It makes up 25% of their national GDP, also 32% of all jobs in the Maldives. But there was no tourism during the lockdown. So when tourism disappeared, so did income. At the same time, expenses kept increasing, more medical spending, more vaccine purchases, more money for doctors and nurses. All of this required additional loans, which is why Maldivian debt is so high today. Now we come to the second question. What is Muizzu's repayment plan? To cozy up to China, believe it or not. Last month, he traveled to Beijing. He held talks with President Xi Jinping. Some 20 deals were signed by the two leaders. They cover a lot of different sectors like infrastructure, tourism, climate resilience, and a whole lot of others. But that's all we know. We don't know how much money is coming in, when it's coming in, or whether it's loans or grants. In what form is this money coming? The deals are shrouded in secrecy. But after the trip to Beijing, Muizzu did make an announcement. He said a Chinese technical team would visit the Maldives. What for? To consider restructuring loans. We haven't heard any update on that. But we've seen how the Chinese negotiate. They play hardball. In Sri Lanka, people did not have fuel to run ambulances. The country had virtually collapsed. But even then, China played hardball. President Muizzu should be mindful of all of that. China's debt and help always comes with strings attached. We're already seeing evidence of that. A Chinese spy ship reached the Maldives today. Mali says it's a routine voyage. No research or studying, just replenishments. But China hinted it could be more.
Over the years, China and Maldives have maintained close cooperation in the field of marine scientific research. China appreciates Maldives' decision according to relevant regulations in international law and based on sovereignty and China-Maldives friendship to provide convenience and assistance for Chinese research vessels to enter its port.
So the ball is now in Muizu's court. He knows the numbers. I'm sure he's heard the IMF warning. Does he still want to get closer to China, or does he want to keep his options open? At the end of the day, it is his call. He is the president. But at stake is the livelihood of 500,000 Maldivians. Now, here is what the Maldives gets wrong. You cannot grow your economy by betting on a few big players. Growth requires opening up. Case in point, India. It is on the verge of sealing a major trade deal. India could get $100 billion in investment from Europe. And the deal could be signed by April. Discussions are in the final stage, and this proposed agreement with Europe stands out for multiple reasons. Typically, in a classic trade deal, countries remove trade barriers by reducing taxes. This tends to boost import and export. But what India is negotiating with Europe is different. Under this deal, New Delhi is willing to open up its markets, but at a price tag of $100 billion. This money will flow in the form of investments, and this will happen over a period of 15 years. The pact guarantees this investment, and that's a rare feature. Trade deals rarely come with a binding clause on investments. And where is this money coming from? A special bloc of European nations. 4 countries are part of it: Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. Together they're called the EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. Currently, it's this bloc that is negotiating with India, not the entire European Union, just this bloc. But this bloc could set a template for the future, something that the rest of the region could choose to replicate. Next question. What kind of investments are they eyeing? And where will this $100 billion go? For now, one area has been identified: new and existing manufacturing projects. They could be state-run entities or private players. This investment has the potential to generate over 1 million jobs. But for India, the benefits of this deal go beyond the money and the jobs. For instance, more visas are on offer. If the deal goes through, Indian professionals could get easy access to these 4 countries: Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. And what do these countries get in return? What's in it for them? Like I said, they're looking for market access. They want to sell a range of products in India. Look at this list: processed food and beverages, electrical machinery, engineering products, also pharmaceutical and medical devices. With this trade deal, they'll be able to sell all these products and more, most likely at reduced tariffs. Obviously, we'll have to wait for the fine print, but on first impressions, this deal has big benefits for both sides, and the agreement has been in the making for a long time. In fact, the conversation started way back in 2008, so it has taken some 16 years for India and the EFTA, this European bloc, to finalize a deal. And it hasn't been signed yet. The European side wants to sign the pact before the general election in India. But is New Delhi on the same page? Reports say the outline of the deal was locked last month. There is an agreement on pressing and controversial issues like patent protection. They've all been sorted. They just have to tie some loose ends, because New Delhi too would like to lock this up soon. In fact, this is not the only trade pact in the pipeline. Reports say India is holding discussions with as many as 50 countries, 50. These talks are happening both at the bilateral level and the bloc level. It remains to be seen how many of these conversations lead to actual agreements. But one thing is quite clear: India is sending a signal to the world. India is open for business. Nvidia versus Amazon. It's a race that makes little sense on paper, because these two companies are not rivals. They do not even sell the same things, nor are they in the same industry. But market experts are making this comparison. Do you know why? Because it's a sign of our times. Nvidia is a semiconductor maker based in the United States. Amazon is an e-commerce giant. Both companies were founded in the 1990s, but in the last 2 decades, one was a clear leader, and that's Amazon. Maybe not for long though. Nvidia is on the brink of overtaking it. Amazon has a market valuation of $1.77 trillion. Nvidia is at $1.73 trillion. Its shares are up 40% this year, 40%, imagine that, 40% up in just under 40 days. At this rate, it will overtake Amazon, one of the biggest companies of our times. What does this signify? What many experts have been saying for a while, chips are the new oil, especially artificial intelligence chips. Every major tech company is on the AI train, and AI needs very advanced chips. And who's making those chips? Mostly Nvidia. The company is set to make up 85% of this market. Just look at their list of customers. Microsoft, Meta, Google, Amazon, Oracle, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, Tesla, ByteDance. Most big tech firms buy chips from Nvidia. So sales are through the roof. I have numbers from the last quarter. Nvidia's revenue was $18 billion. It tripled from the year before. And profits? Around $9.2 billion. That's 14 times higher than the year before. So Nvidia is on a roll, which is why we are taking a closer look at this company tonight. It was founded by 3 American computer scientists in 1993. All 3 came from chip companies. One from AMD, one from Sun Microsystems, and one from IBM. Jensen Huang was one of the co-founders. Today he serves as Nvidia's CEO. The company first focused on computer video games. These games needed 3D graphics. So Nvidia made cutting-edge chips. It became their USP. Other chip firms were selling computing chips. Nvidia was selling graphic cards. That set them apart. That was their USP, like I said. In 1999, the company went public. The same year, they launched a new product, the GeForce 256. It was a major leap in 3D gaming. All these milestones caught the attention of Microsoft. They asked Nvidia to develop the hardware for Xbox. That's Microsoft's gaming console. It was a big deal for Nvidia. The company was paid $200 million upfront. Then came the 2000s. Nvidia started to diversify. In 2003, they collaborated with NASA. They began making chips for Audi cars. In 2007, Forbes declared it Company of the Year. So Nvidia had truly arrived. And around this time, they started focusing on AI. It was a bit accidental. Nvidia had put a lot of focus on parallel computing technology. Think of it as a multitasking feature for chips. The same technology is key in artificial intelligence. So Nvidia had a head start. Now we don't know why the company focused on this technology. Maybe it was foresight, maybe it was a business strategy, but whatever it was, it worked. Today, Nvidia is in pole position. They have a partnership with car maker Toyota. The plan is to use Nvidia chips in self-driving vehicles. But the crowning moment was in late 2022. That's when ChatGPT hit the market. Everyone wanted to know how it was built. Turns out, ChatGPT was built on 10,000 Nvidia chips. Soon, every tech firm rushed for it. They did not want to be left behind in the AI race, and that meant buying Nvidia chips. Of course, some of this attention has backfired too, because last year, the US government asked Nvidia to stop selling high-end chips to China. Washington said it was a national security concern. But for Nvidia, it was a blow because they had orders worth $5 billion from China, orders that they could not fulfill now. But looking at these numbers, their revenue and their profits, Nvidia is doing just fine. They have a borderline monopoly on these AI chips, and that is hard to beat. You see, chips keep evolving. They keep getting better with time. So by the time rivals match Nvidia, Nvidia will be 2 steps ahead. Hopefully. It's all about who has the head start. Also, who doesn't become complacent. So remember this company's name. It's not just a graphics maker anymore. It could be the foundation of the AI age. Now, we are just months away from the US presidential election. Campaigning is picking pace, but it's hard to make sense of what's going on. On the Republican end, we have Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. Trump is busy dealing with his multiple court cases. Haley, on the other hand, is struggling, and she's talking about India. Nikki Haley says India sees the US as weak, and that is why it's stuck with Russia, which doesn't make sense at all. But that seems to be the trend here. A lot of things are not making sense in this presidential election. Look at the Democrat camp. We have US President Joe Biden fighting for another term in the White House. But does he even remember that? I ask because he's been having a lot of trouble on that front. He's forgetting and mixing up names. In a recent press conference, he forgot the name of Hamas. A few days back, he confused Macron with a previous French president. Our next report tells you more.
I think the cause of the Civil War was...
It's not a good time for Nikki Haley. She's one of the Republican presidential candidates, but it's like she's hardly on the ballot. That's because she's running against Donald Trump. In Nevada, she had a stinging loss. She lost against no one. Trump wasn't even on the ballot. She had no competition, and even then, she didn't win. So it's difficult for Nikki Haley. But the former UN ambassador is pushing on. She's continuing with her White House campaign. And now she's talking about India. She claims New Delhi wants to partner with the US, but it doesn't trust Americans to lead. She says India played smart, and that's why it chose to stay with Russia. She said, and I quote, "I have dealt with India too. I have got to say I have dealt with India too. I have talked with Modi. India wants to be a partner with us. They don't want to be a partner with Russia." Now, Haley said all of this in a campaign interview, but the important issue here is the mention of India. It's featuring in the US presidential campaign. Haley herself is of Indian origin. Her parents moved to the US from India. She's hardly talked about her Indian heritage, but looks like she's not shying away from mentioning the country now. So Nikki Haley is talking about India, but on the Democrat side, no one knows what Joe Biden is talking about. It's been just 1 week, but he's already made 3 gaffes. The first involved the French president. He confused Emmanuel Macron with François Mitterrand, France's long-dead former leader. Today, he mixed up 2 other European leaders. He confused former German Chancellor Angela Merkel with another former Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, who's also dead. You would wish that's all, but it doesn't end there. In a recent press conference, he forgot the name of Hamas. He was asked about the hostage negotiations, and Biden just couldn't remember the name of the group. He stuttered multiple times before a reporter jumped in to name Hamas.
There's some movement. There's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
This isn't the first time this has happened. It's been a worry for the Democrats. Biden is already 81 years old, the oldest serving US president. If he wins, he will take office at 82 years. And when he finishes the term, he will be 86 years old. On the other side, there's Donald Trump. He's no spring chicken at 77, and he is facing a series of criminal trials. 2024 is likely to be a 2020 rematch, and that's the poor choice that America is left with.
And if one issue will dominate the discourse in this American election, it's going to be Russia. Biden will campaign on his response to the war in Ukraine and his efforts to isolate Russia on the world stage. But the numbers tell a different story. Despite the war and sanctions, the Russian economy is still growing. In fact, Russia's economy has performed better than some of its Western rivals, especially the major players like the United Kingdom and Germany. Russia is doing better than them. So what's driving Russia's economic resilience? And why is the West lagging behind as sanctions hit Russia? Our next report explores.
In December, a confident Putin faced the press. This was his first press conference since his forces invaded Ukraine. The Russian president was asked about the economy, and he shared a prediction.
The most important indicator of economic growth is the growth of gross domestic product. By the end of the year, it is expected to be 3.5%. That's a good indicator. It means we have bounced back from last year's decline.
The latest economic numbers are out. Last year, Russia's economy expanded by 3.6%. Putin was off by a mere 0.1%, but broadly his prediction was on the mark. Since the invasion of Ukraine, the West has launched a campaign to isolate Russia, mostly through a slew of sanctions. But Russia's economy has shown remarkable resilience. The war gave Russia a boost. In the last 2 years, Russia's industrial output has shot up by over 60%. This has bumped up the growth numbers. The IMF is taking note. The agency has issued a new assessment. It raises Russia's growth outlook. The IMF thinks if Russia can maintain the momentum, its GDP will rise by 2.6%. That number surpasses Russia's own predictions. In November, Russia's central bank had put out a more conservative estimate. It pegged Russia's growth to hover around 1%, 0.5% in a worst-case scenario and 1.5% under better circumstances. IMF numbers suggest that Russia could do better. For the Russian president, his country has prevailed over its Western rivals.
The West predicted, as you know, recession, failure, collapse, that under the pressure of sanctions we would retreat, surrender, fall apart. I would like to show a well-known gesture, but I don't know. But I won't do that. There are a lot of women here. They won't succeed.
For the moment, Russia has indeed edged ahead. Compare Russia's growth numbers with the G7, a group that Russia was kicked out of following the annexation of Crimea. Surprisingly, Russia outperforms every single G7 member. Russia's arch-rival, the United States, is growing at less than 3%. Japan and Canada's economies are expanding at less than 2%. France, Italy and the UK, less than 1%. Germany is right at the bottom and in negative territory. Can Russia sustain similar levels of growth in the absence of a war? The jury is still out on that one. But for the moment, Moscow has managed to survive the onslaught of Western sanctions.
It's day 125 of the Israel-Hamas war. 27,000 people killed, over 65,000 injured. Half of Gaza is a mound of rubble, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not done yet. He was offered a ceasefire deal. Hamas proposed a pause in fighting along with exchange of hostages. Israel was expected to come up with its own counteroffer, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected the deal. He described the terms as quote-unquote bizarre, and he has vowed to fight until complete victory. But what is complete victory? And what will it cost the region and the world? Also, will Netanyahu's allies support this dismissal? Here's a report.
Israel's war with Hamas has dragged into its 5th month. The death toll is rising. 139 hostages remain in Hamas captivity. Diplomacy continues behind doors. But Benjamin Netanyahu has one objective: destroying Hamas, no matter what the cost. The Israeli Prime Minister has rejected a new ceasefire proposal. It came from Hamas. It reportedly had 3 phases. Phase 1 included a 45-day pause in fighting. Israeli hostages would be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, mainly women and children. Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza and reconstruction of hospitals would begin. Then there's Phase 2. Remaining Israeli male hostages would be exchanged. Israeli forces would leave Gaza, and in Phase 3, both sides would exchange remains and bodies. The deal would see a 135-day pause in fighting. Aid would enter Gaza, injured would get medical treatment, and the Strip would get some respite, especially after 125 days of conflict.
We have now given our responses to our brothers in Qatar and Egypt. On their part, they have handed it over to the Americans and handed it over to the other party. Now we are waiting for the response of the other side. We hope that, God willing, this matter will go on. I mean, now people are waiting for what will be the response of the other party.
So Hamas came up with a proposal. Israel was expected to come up with its own proposal. something to counter Hamas's initial terms. But Netanyahu has now outrightly rejected their terms. He has called them bizarre.
There is no solution other than total victory. If Hamas survives in Gaza, it is only a matter of time until the next massacre and the axis of evil of Iran and its proxies will continue its campaign of killing and aggression without interruption. Only a total victory will allow us to restore security in Israel, both in the north and in the south.
So Netanyahu says victory will come, but the question is at what cost? Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister ordered troops to move into Rafah. It is the biggest city in Gaza's far south. 1 million Palestinians are seeking refuge there. A military operation could spell disaster. But Netanyahu is pressing on. But his actions aren't going down too well, both with his allies and with the people of Israel. Let's look at the allies first. Support for Israel's war is waning. Ceasefire is the need of the hour. US Secretary of State is already in West Asia. He even met the Israeli Prime Minister. Discussions are underway. They are being mediated by Egypt and Qatar. Blinken hoped for a breakthrough here, but all he got was Netanyahu's rejection. And it could be seen as a snub. But the US Secretary of State says there is still hope.
What I can tell you about these discussions is that while there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached. And we will work at that relentlessly until we get there.
As for the people of Israel, they want the hostages back home. Netanyahu says ending Hamas is the best way to get them back. But the citizens don't agree. Which explains why the Israeli Prime Minister is losing popularity. When the war started, Israelis backed the military action. But 5 months in, all they care about is the fate of the hostages. They believe the only feasible option to free the hostages is to strike another deal with Hamas, something Netanyahu refuses to do right now. So what happens next? Hamas has proposed a ceasefire. Netanyahu says no. He believes a win will come, even if it takes months. But what does a complete victory even mean? Does it mean saving the hostages or just ending Hamas? Netanyahu may have rejected it now, but as calls for a ceasefire grow louder, how long can the Israeli Prime Minister ignore it?
A phone call after you have left work, an email you need to check on a Sunday, a new project that haunts you during a vacation. Work is increasingly seeping into home life, and the world over, people are braving it. But in Australia, this could soon be outlawed. Australia is set to pass a new law. It is called the right to disconnect. It will give workers the right to their after hours. They will be able to ignore calls and emails from their bosses outside of work hours without any penalty. And if the employers breach this rule, they will have to pay hefty fines. You see, Australians work an average of 6 weeks unpaid overtime each year. In terms of unpaid wages, that is more than $60 billion. So the message here is quite simple. If someone is not being paid for all 24 hours a day, they should not be penalized for not being available all day. Most Australians are happy to hear this.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful idea. I think we need to have our switch-off time. We all need to relax. We all need to be able to switch off and not be disturbed by emails and phone calls in the middle of the night. And but both my kids are lawyers as well, so they sort of work horrendous hours as it is. And if you get things coming in at night time, we all need to be able to switch off and relax. I mean, we're not machines, we're people.
In general, I think the idea that you should be able to switch off when you get to the end of your workday and when you're at home doing your own thing over the weekend or on leave, that seems like generally a pretty reasonable thing to me.
The government is on the same page, hoping that the bill would restore a healthy work-life balance. And the land down under is not alone here. Several countries are staunch advocates for the right to disconnect. European countries are acing this game. France is famous for its 35-hour work week. On top of this, it pioneered the right to disconnect way back in 2017. Italy, Belgium, Spain and Ireland followed suit. Portugal became a recent addition in 2021. All these countries have laws protecting employees after their work, employee after hours. But the specifics differ. In France, all employees can ignore calls after working hours. In Belgium, the right is afforded to government workers. In Portugal, the rule applies to companies with over 10 employees. Meanwhile, outside Europe, the situation is tricky. In Canada, only the province of Ontario has such a policy. In the African nation of Kenya, a maximum of 52 hours of work per week is mandated. But during the pandemic, work ballooned past this. So lawmakers proposed a bill for the right to disconnect. It has become a heated issue in the country, but so far no progress has been made. And that's something that India and the US can relate to. In 2018, the right to disconnect bill was introduced in India's Lok Sabha, the lower house of the Indian Parliament. This bill proposed that no disciplinary action can be taken if an employee does not respond after working hours. The bill was not passed. During the same year, New York City proposed a similar bill. It did not pass either. Since then, the debate has not found widespread traction in either country, and it's not hard to understand why. With the advent of smartphones, work culture has switched to an always-on mode. There is perpetual fear of missing an urgent work text or an important update. To many, it feels like a compulsion. Experts call it the availability creep, where workers feel the need to be available all the time to keep up with their workloads. And like most things, the pandemic made this worse. Boundaries between work and leisure were not strong to begin with. Pandemic-induced remote work further eroded them. According to the world average, workers are putting in longer extra hours. And this is the worst among those aged between 18 and 34. They put in over 8 extra hours of free work per week. This includes staying in late or answering emails from home outside work hours. Yet for many workers, detachment from work is the toxic trait. It can mean that you're lazy or disinterested. It may hinder professional growth, and this is the result. A third of workers say they find it difficult to unplug from work the world over. Research shows that it makes employees unhappier, less motivated, and even sick. According to the World Health Organization, working more than 55 hours a week even raises the risk of death, which is alarming. And the right to disconnect makes us think about all of this. It doesn't just revolutionize our schedules, it changes how we look at work. And if there is a promised land of work-life balance, this could be another stone on the road that leads to it. So one day we might see our time as ours. And now let's turn our attention to Italy. It is wrestling with a bear problem. This week, a forest bear was killed in northern Italy by members of the Forestry Corps. He was deemed dangerous to humans and showed apparently excessive confidence. That's the term they use. The bear showed excessive confidence, so authorities killed him. Now, many Italians are not taking this well. Animal rights activists are protesting. The environment minister has questioned the culling. But Italy is hardly the only one with this problem. Romania cannot bear its rising bear attacks either. In Japan, bear attacks are at a record high. Research says attacks have increased significantly over the past 2 decades the world over. But the reasons differ from country to country. Our next report brings you more.
Bears are crucial for the environment. They are ecosystem engineers. They help spread seeds, strip bark from trees, clean up carcasses. They also control populations of prey species like deer. This allows more plants to thrive. Thanks to bears, species across the food chain benefit. So when bear populations decline, it makes sense that people would panic. This happened in the Alps around the mid-1990s, when brown bears became functionally extinct. Only a handful were remaining, all of them in Trentino, a mountainous city in northern Italy. So the European Union stepped in. Between 1996 and 2004, it funded 2 projects. The aim was to reverse this decline and to save the species. So 10 bears were brought in from Slovenia. Their population was monitored. And now there are over 100 bears in the region, twice the number the scientists had hoped for. So the plan was successful and hugely popular. When it started, 75% of Italians showed support. But now, sentiments have changed. This is a classic case of too much of a good thing. Bears have become a problem for Italy. In 2005, a bear wandered into Germany. In 2008, another entered Switzerland. Both were killed. Last year, 2 bears were found dead in Italy. In the same year, another bear mauled a 26-year-old to death. The same bear attacked 2 hikers in 2020 as well. The matter has now reached the courts. Authorities want it killed. Activists want it transferred to Romania. Among many such legal battles, this week, authorities killed a bear in northern Italy. They claim it was becoming dangerous to humans. It allegedly followed people on 3 occasions and exhibited quote-unquote excessive confidence. But its culling has sparked outrage among protesters who say the action was too swift. Now the Italian Environment Minister has questioned the decision. But Italy is hardly the only one battling the bear problem. Between 2000 and 2015, there were over 600 bear attacks the world over, with the highest numbers in Europe and America. But over time, the attacks have only increased. In fact, bear attacks ranked the highest in a list of attacks on humans by different species, and 9% of bear attacks proved fatal. An experiment may have contributed to this in Italy, but there are 2 big reasons for bear attacks worldwide. One is climate change. With a warming planet, animals are fast losing their natural habitats and encroaching on urban areas. This can be seen in Romania, the bear capital of Europe. It has over 6,000 bears. Between 2016 and 2021, there were 154 bear attacks on humans. The second reason behind attacks is a decrease in the density of humans. We see this in Japan. It has an aging population. Now some prefectures in mountainous regions are sparsely populated. And last year, bear attacks in Japan reached a record high. Numbers exceeded 200 attacks for the first time. But despite the varying reasons, one thing is common across nations. The situation is dramatic and dangerous, and governments need to act fast before the situation becomes too difficult to bear.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Iceland, a volcano in the country's southwest erupts again, spewing lava. In Germany, it's a party behind the bars as female prisoners celebrate the carnival. And move aside Super Bowl, it's time for Puppy Bowl. The US is celebrating 20 years of furry fun. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1971, NASDAQ began trading in the US. It was the world's first electronic stock exchange. On any given day, over 2 billion shares are traded on the NASDAQ. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.